Hey, are you flipping tired of never being able to catch any flipping bass no matter how flipping hard you try or what you flipping do? Well, maybe that's just the answer. Flipping. Okay, y'all, so today I'm talking about flipping. And for any of you that have been following me for any period of time, you're probably already pretty well aware that flipping is my favorite way to catch bass. Whether it's flipping docks or flipping bushes, laydowns, trees, you name it, I like to flip it. And when the conditions are right, flipping is probably one of the most lethal presentations on the water. And in today's video, I'm really going to go into depth with y'all about all the different tips and tricks and hints that I've learned over the years that can help you hook up with a bigger bass when you're flipping. So whether you're new to flipping or whether you've already flipped and it's just not something you're real familiar with, or if you even think you're an expert flipper, this video is still good for you to learn a whole new outlook on how somebody likes to flip. I'm going to really dive into everything that I know in this video. I'm going to talk about water conditions. I'm going to talk about time of year, rod and reel setup, line, weight. I'm going to talk about flipping creature baits versus jigs. And I'm going to talk about the different variations with those two, about color selection, trailer selection. And then I'm going to talk to y'all about presentation and how I like to go about flipping, or what cover I like to flip, and some of the changes that I might make whenever I'm switching up from, let's say, flipping heavy grass or trees or stumps to flipping docks and clearer water. So stay tuned for this video, and I promise you, you're going to learn a lot about flipping. So the first thing that we need to talk about is, what is flipping? And whenever it comes to the definition of flipping, the terminology is kind of hazy there because it really refers to two different techniques, and people kind of lump it into one term nowadays. Technically, flipping is its own technique, where pitching, the technique that I'm talking to you about today, is a whole different presentation traditionally. But over the last few years, we'll say the last decade or so, the terminology flipping and pitching has become universally used the same. Don't get me wrong, there is a slightly different presentation to a true flip, where you pull out the wingspan of your line and you flip it back into some isolated cover. I understand there's some slight differences there, and some hardcore guys will say that there's bites that you can get when you do a true flip that you wouldn't get with a pitch. But for today's video, everybody needs to understand that what I'm talking about is truly pitching. I just refer to it as flipping because, like I said, in bass fishing nowadays, everybody refers to this as flipping. So the second thing that we need to talk about is, why are we flipping, or what are we flipping? What cover are we looking for? What's the purpose behind flipping? And the answer to that question is, whenever you're flipping, you're trying to pick apart cover that you can't target with moving baits like crankbaits or chatter baits or spinner baits or something like that, something that would get snagged up trying to go through there. So a good example is whenever you come across a lot of laydown trees, they have little pockets in there that you just know have to have a bass in them, but you can't just whiz a crankbait through there. So with the presentation of flipping, you can pitch your creature bait or your jig or whatever it is into that isolated target, and you can make a presentation directly to that bass that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do with a moving bait. The third thing that we need to talk about is conditions, time of year. When are you going to flip? And this is probably one of the most important parts to this video. I want everybody to understand that when I say flipping is almost good year round, there is times throughout the year that it shines a lot more than other times of year. So whenever it comes to flipping in the winter, you can go and forget it. If you're somebody that likes to bass fish in the winter, me personally, I don't fish, in the dead cold of winter. But in the colder times of the year, especially before the fish start thinking about the pre-spawn, whenever they're still in the deeper pockets of water on your body of water, flipping's not going to be the bite. Don't get me wrong, there is a chance that you go back into some of these pockets, no matter what time of year it is, and you could pitch back there beside a tree and catch a fish. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying, especially before the pre-spawn ever happens, flipping's not going to be the bite where you go out and catch 5 fish. It's not going to be the bite where you go out and establish some kind of pattern that you can duplicate over and over and over again. Now, after that, whenever we move into the pre-spawn, the flipping bite really starts to take off. So I'm talking whenever the water temps start to get to 53, 54 degrees, the fish are starting to move up to the primary and secondary points. That's when the flipping bite's going to start to get really good. And then as you move into the spawn, the flip is still really good. You can still catch a lot of fish flipping during the spawn, but it's probably not the most effective way to catch spawning fish. Now, immediately into the post spawn, whenever those fish are moving back out off of their beds and they're getting ready to feed up. So at this point, we're talking springtime, we're talking, warmer water temps. The flipping bite's going to get really good. And when it gets its best is going to be kind of in your peak hours of the day, whenever, let's say, the frog bite or the topwater bite starts to wear off after those early morning hours. The flipping bite, whenever the sun starts to come up and push those fish back towards cover, the flipping bite throughout the middle of the day is going to be absolutely amazing into the post spawn. Now, as we move into everything past that, the summer months, flipping's going to be good all summer. But just like anything in the summer, the fish are going to have different patterns. So flipping might not be the most predominant pattern, but if you're in an area that has fish in it, flipping can get you a limit of fish almost all summer long. Into the fall, flipping's going to stay really good until we start to approach the winter pattern. And then once the fish start to move into their winter pattern, the flipping bite's going to be off. So that's when flipping is at its best. Now, as far as watercolor, I've caught fish flipping in dirty water. I've caught fish flipping in clear water. I will say that I have noticed that in like chocolate milk water, the flipping bite's not the juice that day, right? Like, you can catch fish flipping. You can even catch a limit of fish flipping. But whenever there's chocolate milk and whenever the water is deeply stained, you're really going to have to hit those fish on the forehead in order to get any kind of bite out of them at all. Where something like a big Colorado blade spinnerbait or something that makes a lot of noise, like a chatterbait or even a crankbait, can grab more reaction bites in chocolate milk. But the flipping bite works really well in semi-stained water or even clear water. The only suggestion that I'd have, and we'll go into that here a little bit more in a second, whenever you get into that clearer water, you have to start considering going with lighter line, in my opinion. I know there's a lot of people that will flip 20-pound test no matter what the condition is. But for me personally, whenever I get into clearer water conditions, I do like to lighten my line up a little bit. So when it comes to line selection, I will say that there's a lot of different line selections that I make for flipping. But universally, if you're just looking for one line that you're not having to retie a lot because you're not fishing competitions, or you're just not looking to put that much money and stuff into retying all the time, a good 18-pound test fluorocarbon works universally almost everywhere in every condition. But for me personally, I will vary between a 14-pound test and a 20-pound test fluorocarbon. Whenever it comes to why I'm selecting different weights of line, it really comes down to water condition and what type of cover that I'm flipping. If I'm somewhere like Chautauqua, New York, where it tends to be clear water and we're flipping around docks where there's not a whole lot of stuff that can cut up my line, I like to stick to a 14-pound test fluorocarbon because I feel like I get more bites. However, whenever I'm somewhere like Stonewall Jackson or North Bend, where there's heavier, denser cover and the water conditions are usually darker, I like to stay with a higher pound test like a 20 because it prevents break-offs whenever you're around that heavy cover, and it really puts the odds in your favor of getting that fish in your boat. So now for the hooks, and before I even go into the hooks, I already know there's going to be people in the comments saying that I don't know what I'm talking about and that this is going to be kind of controversial for everybody and I'm probably going to get hate mail over it. But for me personally, the hooks that I like to use are these Gamakatsu offset shank worm hooks. And I know, I can already hear it now, people saying that the flipping hooks are better. And, I have a couple of them in my boat here. I'm not opposed to using flipping hooks, like the traditional flipping hook. But for me personally, I just never had a lot of luck with them. I don't like how my bait sits on them. I don't feel like my bait stays on there as well. And honestly, I feel like I get more hookups with these Gamakatsu hooks. Anyways, I set it up just like a regular Texas rig. And I've never noticed myself missing any bass. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying I land every fish that bites whenever I'm flipping, but I land most of them. My hookup ratio whenever it comes to flipping is probably 9 out of 10, to be honest with you. Most of the fish I get bites on whenever I'm flipping, unless they completely miss the bait, 90% of the time they get in the boat with me. So don't think that using these hooks are going to put you at any disadvantage, because I know a lot of people, they get real passionate about the types of hooks that they use. For me personally, I really like these hooks. It doesn't have to be Gamakatsu. I just prefer Gamakatsu because I think they come out of the pack a lot sharper than some of the other brands out there. I'm not saying that other brands are bad. I've just always had really good luck with Gamakatsu. So now, before I get too carried away, let's talk about jigs. And then after I talk about jigs and when I like to use jigs over creature baits, we'll talk about color selection. So for me personally, The only jig I use is the Blue Rock 1099 whenever it comes to flipping. And the reason I use the Blue Rock 1099, one, it doesn't have the most common issue that it seems like every jig you ever get has. But one thing I really hate is whenever you buy jigs and you can't get your line through the eyelet without having to poke through because paint's covering it. With Blue Rock, that never happens. The way they make their jigs, they don't ever get paint in the eyelets, so it's guaranteed that you're not going to have that trouble with it. But the other thing I like about Blue Rock is their bait keeper. So as you can see, their bait keeper with this nice little wire makes it so much harder for your bait to come off. You don't have to mess around with super glue. And honestly, Blue Rock's just a really high quality, small local business that, I really like to use. So you don't have to use Blue Rock, but for me personally, the Blue Rock 1099 is the flipping jig that I like to use. Now, whenever it comes to choosing a jig versus choosing just throwing a straight creature bait, for me personally, I prefer a jig over the creature bait whenever I first start flipping in the year. The reason behind that is because with a jig, I think I can get a little bit slower of a presentation, especially once you put the trailer on it. I think it falls differently. And I think in the cooler months, it gets a lot more bites than what a plain creature bait does. And that could be for a couple of different reasons. Number one, like I said, the way it falls, it can have a slower fall than just a straight creature bait. But number two, a jig with a skirting material, it's going to look like a bigger meal to the fish. And whenever the fish are lethargic like that, if they're going to bite, they're going to want something big. They're not going to go after smaller baits, or they're not going to go after something that doesn't seem worth their while. So in the cooler months, I think the jig is a better option. So really early spring into the pre-spawn, I love a jig. I don't use a flipping jig a whole lot throughout the summer. I stick to just creature baits. But then whenever we move back into the fall, I really like to start picking up that jig again. When it comes to my trailer selection for a jig, there's really the only trailer that I like to use or for jigs is the Rage Menace Grub. I think they work absolutely amazing. Or sometimes these little Berkeley Chigger Crawls will work great as trailers. But 90% of the time, I use one of the Rage Menace Grubs as my trailer on a jig. I like the paddling action that it has. I think that it makes the bait fall great. And I think it's an overall really good presentation for a jig. Whenever it comes to my color selection for jigs, I keep it really simple. Black and blue and green pumpkin are really the only two colors that I keep of a jig. In the cooler months of the year, like really cold, way before the pre-spawn, I have been known to throw a red jig every now and then, but 99.99% of the time, it's going to either be a black and blue or a green pumpkin jig. Okay, so now the last thing before I show you how I rig all this together, let's talk about weight selection. And I know a lot of you might think that weight selection isn't that important, but it really is. I cannot emphasize to you enough how important weight selection really is. Not only with pretty well every technique you're going to use in bass fishing, but whenever it comes to flipping, weight selection is crucial. Not only with your tungsten weights or your bullet weights, but with your jig selection as well. Weight selection is going to really make the difference between whether you have a day where you catch 20 huge fish and you're calling all day, and you go into the boat ramp with a giant sack of fish, you're competing for first, versus being the guy that barely scrounged together a limit that day. And you could even be throwing the same bait, same color, same everything as the other guy, but because you chose to throw a weight that was too heavy or too light to whatever the conditions were that day, you didn't catch the fish. And I know a lot of you think, well, it really can't be that complicated. And I hate to break it to you, but it really can be whenever it comes to trying to catch a high quality, high quantity amount of bass. So how do I determine the weight selection I'm going to use? And it really falls into weather conditions and time of year. For me personally, whenever it's like the pre-spawn, whenever I first start flipping, like I was talking to you all about earlier, the cooler months, I like to use the lightest weight I can get by with. I usually start at a 3 ounce, and as long as I can effectively get through the cover that I'm trying to fish, I'll stick to a 3/8 ounce. Obviously, if you're fishing heavier cover, like if you're down in Florida where there's heavy grass mats, stuff like that, you're going to have to use an ounce and a half. But ultimately, whenever it's cooler water temperatures, I like to go with what the lightest weight I can get by with is. And then whenever I move into the summertime, as long as we're around heavy cover or you know, kind of dingy, stained water, I like to go after reaction bites. So I like to stick to a 1/2 ounce or whatever it takes to get through the cover. But 1/2 ounce is typically where I start. Now, the exception to the whole heavier weight in the summertime thing is if I go to a lake like some of the really clear lakes I fish up north, like Chautauqua, around those boat docks where I use lighter line, I also like to use a lighter weight because I feel like since the fish are getting a better look at it, it increases my chances of hooking up. So really, it's kind of complicated, I guess, but it's going to be a mix between time of year and the conditions that you're fishing. So I guess the easiest way to put it to y'all is, especially earlier, cooler months, try to go with a lighter weight. Summer months, to go after reaction bites, try to stick to something 1/2 ounce or heavier. And in different scenarios, where you're in an area with super clear water, like fishing docks and there's not heavy cover, you're fishing really light line, maybe move back down to a 3/8 ounce. So now let me show you how I like to rig it all up. First thing I like to do is put on your bobber stopper. And to put on a bobber stopper, as you can see there, they have a little hoop through them. You just run one end of your line through that hoop and pull the bobber stopper over just like that. Now once you do that, you'll notice you have a little kink in your line right there. I always immediately cut that off. You don't want to use that in your knot. It's obviously going to be a weak point, and if you just cut it off now, you won't accidentally forget it later. Next thing I like to do before I move my bobber stop up, I like to wet the line a little bit just to make sure that I don't burn up the line or the bobber stop. And then I pick my weight. So today I'm going to go with a 1/2 ounce tungsten weight. And I know I didn't go into this into detail yet, but while I'm tying on, I guess I can explain it to y'all. The difference between lead and tungsten. Lead is a softer metal. It's not as dense, so you're going to have bigger weights or more size to your weights to achieve the weight that you're wanting. And you can't fill as much with it. Whereas tungsten's a denser metal, you'll have smaller size weights for the weight that you're trying to achieve, and you can fill more of the stuff that you're coming over. Some of the downsides to tungsten, obviously they're more expensive, but two, it can be a little bit more damaging to your line. If it's in your budget, I suggest using tungsten. I solely flip with tungsten because of how compact it is, and I think that I personally get more bites because of how much more I can feel the cover as I'm coming through. Now it's time to hook up my hook. So whenever I hook up the hook, I just use a simple Palomar knot. I know some people like to use snail knots whenever they set up their flipping setup, but I'm not using the traditional flipping hook since I'm using the EWG. I just tie a simple Palomar knot, which I've done videos on in the past. If you guys are interested, maybe more known about how to tie a Palomar knot, just drop it there in the comments. I'll be more than glad to make another video on it. But let me get this set up real quick. Yeah, so now I got my hook tied on. I'll usually re-lubricate the line, slide the bobber stopper down. Now, one thing I do differently than maybe some of the other people do, I don't like to put my bobber stopper right up against my weight. And the reason behind that is I think if there's a little bit of room there, it allows the bait to move up to where you can get a better hook set in the fish. I really think that if you keep it pushed up too tight against the hook, you're going to take a really good chance of pulling that hook right out of the fish's mouth. You're going to knock it right out. So I like to leave just a little bit of room between my weight and my bobber stopper. And finally, it comes time to rig up the bait. And all I do is a simple Texas rig to make it weedless. Like I said, I don't make it complicated at all. If you're using a regular flipping hook, it is a little bit different if you want to make it weedless. But I just pop it through that last appendage right there like that. Tuck it in, and then, you know, make sure your appendages or your tail split apart. But there you have it, set up. Okay, y'all, so that's the end of this video on flipping. My name's Jordan. If you enjoy this experience, make sure you click that like and subscribe button. I'll see you all next time.